this is shaping up to be one of the wildest, I think, Republican primaries coming up. And I've been looking forward to talking with you because my first question is, why in the world do you want to subject yourself to this? Why on earth would you get into the mud pit? And I honestly think that the Republican primaries are meaner than Democrat primaries. Why do this?
So, Dana, it's honestly because I'm patriotic about this country. I actually believe in this country. I have lived the full arc of the American dream. But I'll tell you this, I was born in 1985. If I had been born just 20 years later, I don't think my story would have been possible in the same way. I really mean that. And so for me, I'm not just running as a guy who, yes, has built successful businesses, yes, has had success in business. As you said, there is one of those in every presidential race. This isn't just that. For those who actually do know me and have been following me for the last 3 years, I also wrote the book Woke Inc. I wrote Nation of Victims, really shaping much of the conservative agenda in the so-called culture war that you see today. Well, the positive side of that came from actually the work that I've been doing for several years as a national leader behind the scenes. And I think the reason I'm in this race is I think the leader of this country who takes our country to the next level, who revives the answer to even what it means to be American today, something my generation has forgotten. That person can't just be pushing somebody else's agenda. This isn't a 999 tax plan like Herman Cain, or this isn't a plan to reform Social Security. This is about reviving a missing national identity. And for better or worse, Dana, I'm not running on somebody else's vision. I'm running on my own vision for what it means to be American. And I'm all in for the America First agenda. I really am. I'm an unapologetic America First conservative. But to put America first, we need to rediscover what America is. And if there's a president who's going to do that, who's going to actually dismantle the managerial bureaucracy in the federal administrative state that stands as an obstacle to our national identity, it's going to have to be done not by some plastic politician who's a career bureaucrat or a career politician, but somebody who's an outsider. There's two people in this race who fit that description, Donald Trump and myself. And I think that is why pretty soon this will be a two-horse race between Trump and myself. Now, I can tell you why I'm in this race and intend to go the distance. But that's how we're looking at this.
Now, you've said before that you were inspired to run, and I've read an interview, you said you were inspired to run because you saw that Trump came out in 2016 from, kind of the Hollywood business boardroom sphere and decided to enter politics. And you saw that and thought, that maybe means that this could happen again. That, you don't have to be from DC, you don't have to be a swamp creature, you don't have to be someone who's embedded in politics to run. Is that true? If so, what would you do differently from him in your campaign as opposed to what he did?
Yeah, so it wasn't just the political analysis of it, Dana, to say, oh, an outsider can do it, therefore I'll do it. No, I actually respect that it took an outsider to actually bring a baseball bat to the administrative state. You couldn't have seen someone who was a product of that system do it. Now, I think you only get to be an outsider once. And just like I don't expect I'll be the same person 8 years from now after going through what this experience will entail. I don't think I'll be the same person then as I am now. But I've got fresh legs under me. So it's not Trump today. It's Trump in 2015 that actually I took inspiration from, which I think there's a difference between the two. Now, I think that what would I do differently? Well, I think part of it is building on a foundation that he laid. So I recognize accomplishments where I call them out. I'll call it like I see it. He accomplished a lot. But I think we can go even further, go the actual distance. And so the issues I'm taking on, many of them include issues that even Trump danced around very gently. I've said I'm going to end affirmative action. That is something that a U.S. president can do. Lyndon Johnson created it by executive order. Any U.S. president since then could have ended it by executive order. I personally pushed Trump's people, policy team, on why they didn't. The answer was they said that's not a political hill they wanted to die on. Well, I'm willing to take that on head on. I've been very clear about that. The climate cult, unleashing American energy, that's only going to happen if we actually abandon the demands of this new climate religion in America. No other Republican is able to take that on head on in the same way I am. Using the military to end the fentanyl crisis south of our own border, shutting down the FBI, shutting down the U.S. Department of Education. These are all just examples of policies I've already committed to. But the key question, Dana, is why am I able to do that? First of all, forget a plastic politician or a career politician, even the Ron DeSantis of the world, if I may say so expressly. They're not going to be able to do it if they're beholden to a donor class. But Trump is an outsider too. But I think I intend to go even further than Trump did with the America First agenda, take it to the next level, but also do it in a way that unifies this country. Because you know what the way to do that is? You do it from a strong moral foundation with moral authority. And you know what? I am a proud parent, believer in God, 2 kids in a stable family, married to my wife. I think that when we do it with a strong moral foundation as a leader, we don't just preach family values. We don't just preach faith. We actually practice what we preach as leaders, to say that I want a leader in the White House who's both an outsider and somebody I can look my son in the eye and say, I want you to grow up to be like him. With that, I think we can do what Reagan did in the 1980s. And we were in a national identity crisis in the late 70s. Exactly. We were in a national identity crisis in the 70s. Reagan led us out of it with moral authority. That's what I'm intending to do in 2024.
We're talking with Vivek Ramaswamy, and I like what you've written about culture war and wokery. I mean, I too think that it's weird that e pluribus unum, which is our motto, has been weaponized and used against us, inverted. It's bizarre. I want to check your temperature on some issues that you don't have a record on. Because this was my concern, to be frank, with Trump in 2016. It's why I went for a governor. I always go, usually governors are, if it's an open Republican primary, I lean towards like governors, because I'm like, okay, it's like President Jr. in a way. And I look for a record or something that I can measure. So let me take your temperature on some other stuff. Would you abolish the IRS, for instance?
I would be strongly inclined to abolish the IRS. So we've identified a list of agencies that we're going to commit to shutting down. I've already committed to 3 of them. The Department of Education. I've committed to shutting down the FBI. I've also committed to shutting down the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which has gone too far in standing in the way of nuclear energy. I've also said that we would cut 90% of the employees in the U.S. Federal Reserve from about 22,000 to less than 2,000, which is what the Federal Reserve actually needs. The IRS is actually next on our list. So I'm a big believer in not just spouting off, Dana. We're digging deep in this. I'm very favorably disposed to either a Federal Reserve style 90% plus headcount reduction in the IRS, or possibly just reevaluating, like with the FBI, shutting it down and building something small from scratch to take its place. But that's exactly the mentality I'm bringing to this, which no Republican president has ever done.
What about the ATF? There's a lot of people, I don't think that this sentiment was the same 10 years ago, but a lot of people on the right now definitely have been criticizing the ATF, particularly after we've seen regulatory abuses, like also with the CDC. I mean, it's really less about firearms and more about agencies creating rules that are treated as law and circumventing Congress. What about like the ATF?
And circumventing the Constitution in the process, right? Because the Constitution sets into motion a 3-part system of government without a 4th branch of government that actually, in a waterfall of political accountability, actually controls most of the show today.
Right.
So I think that CDC, ATF, FDA, SEC, a lot of EPA, a lot of these are on the list. And even after West Virginia versus EPA, this key case from the Supreme Court last year, I think a lot of the behaviors of that entire administrative state are unconstitutional as written. So part of this is actually just acting with executive authority to put those agencies back in their place, Dana, not by going to Congress and asking them to abolish it. I'm talking about by executive order. Because if that's unconstitutional action in the executive branch itself, you need neither the permission nor the forgiveness of Congress to actually shut it down. And I'm a believer in Article 2 of the Constitution that says that the President of the United States actually runs, who would have ever thought, the duly elected president runs the executive branch rather than an unelected permanent state. And if you think about the ATF and you think about Heller, you think about a lot of the evolution in jurisprudence around actually what the Second Amendment means. If you have a government agency that's completely acting antithetical to even the Constitution as interpreted by a current Supreme Court, that empowers a chief executive to actually execute the actual laws of the United States rather than what the administrative state would like the laws to have been.
I mean, that's definitely the way to do it, our pathway to do it, for sure. Some people will say, we're talking with Vivek Ramaswamy, who's running for president in 2024. You've read his books on CRT, DEI, wokery, all of it with culture war. Now, some say, Trump talked a great game about the wall and immigration, but never actually got the wall built. I mean, and especially when we were controlling Congress, I mean, wasn't even able to wrangle Republicans in Congress to, do what was necessary to make that happen. How do you overcome that? Because, that was his big talking point going into the election in 2016. How do you not end up the same?
So I'm coming at this from a unique combination here, Dan. On one hand, I'm a constitutional scholar. I went to Yale Law School, whole 9 yards. You see a lot of the legal analyses in my books, articles, scholarship. On the other hand, I'm a business person who brings a very practical understanding of how to get things done. So I'll say this. Trump actually had to both expose the problem and solve it. He had 4 years. He at least exposed the problem and began to solve some of it. Now, my view on the border is you can't just use the wall. That alone would have been insufficient. Certainly today, you have a Swiss cheese of a southern border with or without a wall, effectively abating the fentanyl crisis responsible for 100,000 plus deaths per year in the U.S. I think you need to use the wall and use the military to secure the border. Here again, it comes to a constitutional understanding. This is not with congressional permission. I, as Commander-in-Chief of the United States, intend to use our military to protect our own border. That is controversial.
Would you treat the cartels as terrorists?
Absolutely. But treating them as terrorists is not just what other people mean, which is freezing their financial assets. That's what they're talking about. That's table stakes. If I want to treat them as terrorists, I'm going to treat them like bin Laden, al-Zawahiri, treat them like Soleimani. I'm talking about targeted drone strikes, airstrikes, actually kill the head of the snake when it comes to the fentanyl crisis in the U.S. That is a legitimate use of force. And if we can do it to ISIS on the other side of the world, we can do it in Mexico. A little bit of an operational point here, Dana, and I've learned a lot about this. The NSA has dedicated no intelligence resources whatsoever to Mexico. All of it's gone to the Middle East. Well, if we did even a fraction of that attention to what we were able to do to ISIS in Iraq and Syria, to be able to do that south of the border to the failed narco state that is Mexico, there's the fentanyl crisis over in one fell swoop. That's a first 6-month item that I intend to deliver on as president.
I don't mean to rush you. I want to make sure we get, because there's at least one more other question I want to get to before we wrap here, because radio, I mean, obviously they'll push us into commercials. But so last week, 2 huge headlines came out of the meeting with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping was in Moscow. It was a really weird thing to see them walking with, all the Russian military, et cetera. That came out of it that China had brokered a normalized relations deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But then also interesting, Vladimir Putin announced that they're going to be trading and doing business in Chinese currency. So there went the petrodollar. What would a Vivek presidency or an economic plan to counter that and restore dominance to the American dollar look like?
Well, you want to start with the dominance for the American dollar. It actually starts with American dominance on the fundamentals, starting with energy. So you're going to talk about the petrodollar. What have we done under the Biden administration? We have shot ourselves in the foot when it comes to our own production of fossil fuels, including natural gas, including oil, and yes, including coal, even though that's a 4-letter word, literally and figuratively to a lot of people. So I think that energy security is inextricably linked to national security. I don't think Putin would have invaded Ukraine if the United States actually had the ability to supply both the U.S. and Western Europe as recently as we did even in 2019 and 2020. So my presidency is all about unapologetically unleashing American capabilities. Drill, frack, burn coal, embrace nuclear.
Expand refineries.
Of course, expand refineries, solve the permitting process that the administrative state stands in the way of today. That is how we achieve both energy security, GDP growth, and most importantly, national security versus our adversaries. And I'm going to deliver it. And again, a professional politician, Dana, they're just not going to get the job done in the White House. I'm going to come in as an outsider, but with a bone-deep constitutional conviction that will allow me to see this through. That's why I'm in this race.
Man, they would hate you in D.C. Why would you want to
they already do.
Yeah, they hate you already. Vivek Ramaswamy, it's very good to talk with you. This is our first time talking. You had some really good ideas, and this is a good first conversation. I'd love to have you back and talk some more. I know I'm going to be on your podcast as well, so we'll continue the conversation. But thanks for joining us. Good to have you.
Looking forward to it.
Of course.
Thank you.
Take care.